President Trump has a plan to beat Russia and China without firing a single shot. But can this plan actually work? Welcome to China Uncensored, I'm Chris Chappell. Before we get started, did you know that YouTube hides a lot of our episodes? It's because of something called restricted mode. Check it out. Here's our channel unrestricted, and here it is on restricted mode. Notice the difference? Lots of episodes just disappear. So if you haven't already, go up to your profile picture, click on it, and go down to restricted mode. Make sure that's turned off, so YouTube will stop hiding our episodes from you. And don't forget to leave a comment with a honeypot emoji as part of Operation Honeypot, our mission to fight YouTube censorship. Anyway, on with the episode. Donald Trump is dealing with a lot, from cracking down on crime domestically to bringing peace to the Middle East and Ukraine. You could say his plate's full. And what's another name for fine dishware?
China!
That's right. A lot of the problems tie back to China. And so Trump may have found a way to solve all of these problems by merging them together. Why have 30 big problems when you can just have 10 catastrophic problems? So, just what is the plan? Break Russia and China's so-called no-limits partnership. Eliminate that, and so many things fall into place. Trump announced this plan on Truth Social, because of course he did. Don't worry, I'll summarize. Basically, he wants NATO nations to stop buying oil from Russia, since that's fueling the war. Which NATO countries are still buying oil from Russia? I'll get to that in a minute. But once they agree to that, as a bloc, the US and NATO nations will slam Russia with massive sanctions. At the same time, they'll hit China with tariffs from 50 to 100% until Russia's invasion of Ukraine ends. Why hit China too? Because China is basically bankrolling Russia's invasion at this point. Trump wants Europe to be just as invested in ending the war in Ukraine as the US is. Which brings us to Russian oil. But first, if you like this kind of deep dive into what's really going on in China, you've got to subscribe to my premium website, ChinaUncensored.tv. That's where you'll see episodes and live streams we can't put on YouTube. I can't continue to make China Uncensored without your support, and buying a membership is the best way you can. It's just the price of a bag of coffee. Once again, that's ChinaUncensored.tv. So, since the war in Ukraine started, the largest importers of Russian fossil fuels have been China and India. Trump is already applying 50% tariffs on India over this, and India and the US are now holding trade talks to address the situation. But number 3 on the list of countries buying Russian fossil fuels is Turkey, which is, drumroll please, a NATO country. Hungary and Slovakia also buy a ton of Russian oil and are also NATO countries. There's also the little problem that the EU spends more on Russian oil and gas than financial aid to Ukraine. What are we even doing here, guys? Unless this stops, the war will continue. The US can't do this alone, hence Trump's proposal. Now, the EU is reacting with a plan for more sanctions on China. China's economy is already suffering from the US-China trade war. If the US and Europe can actually work together and agree on teaming up against the Chinese Communist Party, we can push them over the edge. China would be forced to abandon Russia, which would show that the no-limits partnership actually does have limits. An embarrassing end for that supposed New World Order Xi and Putin have talked about, which didn't even last as long as New Coke. And if you've never heard of New Coke, exactly. So this sounds like it makes total sense, especially since, despite Trump-Putin talks, Putin has increased his strikes on Ukraine, and there was that teensy-tiny incident with the Russian drones going into Polish airspace. Now that could have been unintentional, but it's definitely not a good look. And the EU, the UN, and NATO are not happy about it. But there are some challenges to Trump's plan. For one, a Chinese representative privately told the EU recently that the CCP can't accept Russia losing its war against Ukraine because then the US could turn its full attention to China. which could be interpreted as China saying it won't abandon Russia and Ukraine no matter what, tariffs be damned. Then there are concerns about what tariffs on China could do to the global economy. As one German MEP put it, the EU should avoid blanket punitive tariffs on China of the magnitude proposed by Mr. Trump. Such measures would undermine the global trading system and are more likely to harm the European economy than to weaken Russia. After all, China has struck back at European tariffs with anti-dumping probes and tariffs of its own. That's on top of the lumbering bureaucracy that is the EU. NATO doesn't handle economic policy. That would be handled through the European Commission, and that process could take forever, especially because those NATO countries I mentioned earlier that buy a ton of Russian oil, well, they're very close to China. I don't think they'll vote to support the plan. In other words, the EU can't even agree to implement such a policy, and even if it did, the process would likely take several months. Plus, they're not as big fans of gambling as the guy who owns multiple casinos. But what do you think? Can Trump's plan work? Leave your comments below. Once again, I'm Chris Chappell. See you next time.